attacking every day, but I'm watching while I pray. No matter the attack, I won't turn back. This means war. Come on, come on, come on. This means war. This means war. This means war. Devil, I'm declaring war. I got joy in my soul, 'cause God is in control. I got Satan on my trail, but I'm singing all is well. He's attacking every day, but I'm watching while I pray. No matter the attack, I won't turn back. Yeah. This means war. This means war. This means war. This means war, yeah. This means war. This means war. Hey, say I plead the blood. I plead the blood. I plead the blood, yeah. I plead the blood. The blood of Jesus. I plead the blood. I plead the blood, yeah. I plead the blood. I plead the blood. I plead the blood of Jesus. I plead the blood. I plead the blood of Jesus. I plead the blood. I plead the blood of Jesus. I plead the blood. Hey, I got joy in my soul, 'cause God is in control. Satan's on my trail, but I'm
All right. Like it and share it. Like it and share it. We're going to go live. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. Like it and share it. We got about 5 minutes, so like it and share it. I've got Dr. Eddie Phillips in the house. So 5 minutes, 5 minutes.
I'm declaring war on the devil. This means war, yeah. I plead the blood. I plead the blood. I plead the blood of Jesus. I plead the blood. 'Cause the blood covers and it will wash. I plead the blood. I plead the blood of Jesus. I plead the blood. I plead the blood, yeah. I plead the blood. I plead it over my family. I plead the blood. I plead it over my life. I plead the blood. I plead the blood, yeah. I plead the blood. Oh, you can't have my family, and you can't have my increase. You can't have my breakthrough, no. You can't have my family, no. You can't have my increase, no. And you can't have my breakthrough. Oh, you can't have it. You can't have it. You can't have it. I plead the blood. I plead the blood. Everything I have is mine. I plead the blood. Everything I want is mine. I plead the blood. I plead the blood of Jesus. I plead the blood. I plead the blood that heals. I plead the blood. I plead the blood that saves. I plead the blood. I plead the blood that cleans. I plead the blood.
Go ahead on, like it and share it. Like it and share it. We're going to actually start this conversation in about 2 minutes. We're going to start at 6 o'clock. I'm just blessed to have Dr. Eddie here. I'm on his schedule, but you're going to learn some things here today, okay? Yeah, I see Dr. James Jefferson. I see Tim. You're on, yep. You know, if he was in town, I got a chance to meet him for the first time, we're going to have a live. I see Mama Michelle. You all, I see my wife is online, huh? All right. Come on, like it and share it. Like it and share it. There's some information sitting here right next to me, and we're going to tap into that brain today, okay? So we've got now 1 minute. All right, all right, all right. Good evening, good evening. Can you guys hear us? Turn your mic on there. I want to make sure you guys can hear us, and then we're going to get started.
Hopefully they can.
Can y'all hear us? Hey, Dr. Sarn, you know what? I really initially planned this at 8 o'clock because I knew you come on at 7 o'clock and we watch you, but Dr. Eddie's got a pretty tight schedule, so he said, can we do it early? I know I wasn't going to do it at 7 o'clock because that's your time. And so we decided at 6 p.m. 6 p.m. Are y'all ready? Oh, you can hear me. Oh, Prophetess Razor. If Prophetess, if that great wonder Prophetess Razor can hear me, then we can be heard. That's what I've got to say.
Can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me?
You want to talk a little louder? I'm right next to you.
Can you hear me? Is it good?
Do y'all hear Dr. Eddie? Yeah, yes. Look. I first of all, I met Eddie a few years ago. I see Sister Gordon, Pastor Sarr, and Sister Hines. I see you. A few years ago, Deacon Lucas told me. He said, "Man, you need to meet my brother-in-law, right?" He said, "I tell you, you guys, if you guys ever meet and come together, it's gonna be something, right?" And this was a couple of years ago. And just Sunday, I met him for the first time, right? We've been online and we've communicated online a lot, and he's actually written forward on a book. He's actually given me historical guidance and some of the things that I wrote. But this is one of the most knowledgeable people in history. And not just black history, but overall history. But he also has the ability to tie black history into world history and the all of the geographics and the geometry, geology, I should say, of all of this, right? I'm talking geometry, math, right? What am I talking about here? But he's a world of information. And when I got to meet him, I said, man, I really should have put this together when I thought about Sunday, but it wasn't. I was in prayer last night, and then I got up this morning, I'm thinking, man, we should do a live before he go, right? And it seemed like Deacon Lucas was praying the same prayer. He said, we should do a live before he go. Now, here's what, and this is going to be pertinent. This is going to be pertinent. But he did a post. He did a post yesterday, about a day ago, and I'm going to read it from the Erudition Network. If you slap him upside the head and make him write a book, okay, that's what your brother-in-law said. I don't know what I want to slap him. You know, he's a Navy man and he's been in the weight room and stuff, and so I think I'll ask him to write a book. But look, this is a couple of days ago. He wrote a post, and when he wrote a post, I said, "Man, I want to talk to him about this." But I'm gonna read it. It says, "The Bible says that Nimrod," and this is from Eddie K. Phillips, and it's on the Erudition Network, and you see it right there. If you haven't subscribed to the Erudition Network, now is the time to do it. Today is to do it because you're going to get some information. Oh, I see Deacon James Thomas on here. But look what he says, because I've been decrying about how people have told lies about Nimrod, right? And there is a whole undercurrent to this. But he wrote this post. He said, the Bible says that Nimrod was from Cush, and he was the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham and the great-grandson of Noah. The Bible described Nimrod as a king in the land of Shinar, known now as Mesopotamia. And it gives you the scripture, Genesis 10, 8 through 10. 10 says that Nimrod was a mighty warrior and hunter before the Lord. The centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Shinar. Nimrod was Cushite and of African origin. Historians conjecture about him being real because he links Africa with the Levant and Mesopotamia empire that established written languages, cities, trade, historians, and trade. Historians hide and give credit to the Eubanians and the Anatolians for establishing the kingdoms of Mesopotamia, and we know that's a lie. Lies persist because of the need to hide the migration of black people. This migration happened for many reasons, and we have tried to share those reasons here on the Erudition Network. Africa's persistent exposure to the most solar rays on the planet, changes in the tilt of the earth that cause solar isolation and irradiance, changes in sea levels that cause migrations to higher grounds. All these things are provable and shown through thermal maps, scientific study, and historical evidence. We get a mix of lies and facts in the narrative taught to us. The need for parsing is essential. Join us here in this, the Erudition Network, Black History Sessions Group, and the Erudition Network as we give factual information and grow understanding. Dr. Eddie, first I want you to introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about you.
Okay.
And then I want to get into the meat of this post.
Okay. Well, I am. My name is Eddie Phillips. I've been studying history. I don't know since I can think about reading. I mean, I've always been interested in history, and particularly, I have always been interested in Black history because I believe that from reading our history overall, I started to realize that there was a lot of us left out of it. People didn't look like me, they didn't sound like me, and then I was like, well, where are we in this history? And so it inspired me to go in and actually start to pick at the scab, so to speak, and try to figure out where are we in our historical studies. And it's taken quite some years. It takes a lot of study, reading, and trying to figure out where we are. And so a couple of years ago, we established the Erudition Network. The Erudition Network's primary design is to teach history. We say Black history, but Black history is world history. And so we spend a lot of time trying to uncover those things that are hidden, to talk about those things we're not really told about, and to get us interested in knowing who we are, with the idea that if we know who we are, then we know where we're going, we know where we come from. And so that's really what Erudition's goal is. And I thank you, Pastor Razor, for being a very big supporter early on with us and getting out here and doing this, because it is something that is needed. It is something that needs to be taught. So when we talk about, even with the Bible, the churches, a lot of people don't know to go in and pull that history and realize how truthful the Bible is to history, right? And how it aligns with the history of man from the beginning, into where we are now. And so we want to have and if that be the case, then that means Black folks are in it, right? So we want to make sure that we are talking about that, and we're open and we're honest and we're factual about that.
Okay, and you know what, and just like you were studying history, and I when I talked to you, you said other people would be out playing ball or border, and you'd be still reading history. I was doing the same thing with the Bible. And literally, I had older people they would say, everybody else is out playing, blah, blah, you in there studying the Bible, you're reading the Bible. And because I had questions that I needed answered, and they were not being answered on Sunday. And when I went into a Bible class, they would just say, pray about it. Right, and there were just things that were just not that wasn't adding up to me. Things that just weren't. So I needed to know, right? And so I took it up on myself to try to find the Bible and make the Bible real for people. And what I found was the same issue that you have with the historians trying to diminish or minimize or altogether obliterate the importance of Black contribution to society, to the world and to society. I found that same thing was real in the religious side, right? That there was a concerted and comprehensive effort to ignore Black people and to minimize the importance of the relationship of Black people with God.
That's exactly it. Yep.
I mean, there was on the religion side, just like it was in academia and all. And really, it gets to the point now to where, as we start to grow and learn, you know, when you learn better, you do better. We ought to do better, right?
Yeah.
We ought to do better. And so the first thing that about that post you mentioned, though, is Nimrod. Is Nimrod. Now, I've grown up, and in society, when people were uncoordinated, they called him a Nimrod. You know, just kind of
you're a Nimrod. Yeah,
you're a Nimrod. They call you Nimrod. And then when you get into the church, you hear about people preaching about how evil Nimrod was.
Was evil. He was against God.
He was against God. And so I went to study the Bible, but I never saw in the Bible where it states that Nimrod was evil. Now we're gonna do this from time to time. We're gonna go to a slide. I'm gonna let him explain his slides, but since he started out with Nimrod,
Go ahead.
we're going to talk about Nimrod. And if you put it there, if you look on the screen here, what I did, he posted 4 pictures with his post, and I've taken those pictures and put them in. And then I've got a new class that I'm going to be teaching as part of our curriculum. I'm going to start in January, called The Bible History of Black People. I pulled a few pages out of that course. Not a whole lot, because I mean we're going to do the whole course. But in the course we talk about Nimrod. It says Genesis 10th chapter, the 8th to the 10th verse. And Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. What's so evil about being a mighty one in the earth?
No.
He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. He was even before the Lord. He was a mighty hunter. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Caleb, and the land of Shinar. Now, and then I go to the truth about many about Nimrod. We're going to go through these different slides, and these. Many erroneously deem his attempt to build the Tower of Babel to be rebellion against God, but nowhere in the Bible is this stated or even implied. You don't find it implied. The fact is that even though God prevented him from building the tower, God commended Nimrod for being a mighty one in the earth. And God at no time condemned Nimrod for his attempt to build the Tower of Babel or for any of his other efforts. Now, when people normally come to me with this, they come to me with all the other book, Ezra, or either, read those books. Now, here's the thing about this. And in those books, they talk about how evil Nimrod was. But now, when I look, I don't just go and read the book.
Okay.
I find out who the author who wrote it, or if they can find out who wrote it, and what time.
There you go.
Now, what I found is that these writings that say that Nimrod was evil, that they try to do, they were written in the 18th and 19th century.
Yes.
Now, we consider the first Africans that were brought to America. And we say in 1619.
Yep.
But Africans were being taken off of the continent of Africa, captured and kidnapped long before then.
Yes.
And they were being taken to lands where the Spanish were, the Portuguese were in charge, and Spain. They were so. And you go from that time on, a lot of these writings where they say Nimrod were evil were written during that time period by European or Caucasian people.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm going to show you all tonight that those people had they had something to gain.
Yes.
By minimizing the influence of the black people or the African people in that. There's not really, if we're going to be believers and use the Bible as our guide, there's nothing in the Bible that speaks of Nimrod as being evil.
Not at all. they can't find it, and you can't. Everything you see in the Bible supports that Nimrod was a mighty man before God. So how is it that, again, those who conjecture into, who lie and have prejudiced reasons to put that into history, and that's why they do it, right? Because you don't want to see anything that is black, and unfortunately, that is history, right? One of the historians, Sales, said that it has never been a good thing in the minds of Europeans for blacks or Africans to be seen as the early man. It has always been seen as detrimental to them. So that is always an issue.
Okay, we're gonna go. I'm not gonna go any farther here, because when we go to the migratory paths. When we go to the migratory paths, I'm going to bring that back up again, and I'm going to even show you how even in our religion, and I tell you what, don't get your feathers ruffled, because tonight I'm going to even show you where the King James, the translators in King James. See, a lot of people don't accept no other version of the Bible but King James.
That's true.
But the translators of King James came up in that same era when it was the thing to do to minimize the black thing. So they in some places they didn't translate, they interpreted.
Yes.
And gave us what they wanted us to know.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and I'm going to give you one example of that tonight. But you talk about the migratory paths of black people, and you put up you have 4 pictures, and I don't know which one of them you want me to go to first.
You can put the heat map up first. So
okay.
I think it's always good to start at the heat map of Africa, because it speaks to the solar interpolation, right? And for those who are not science-based people, to put that very easily, and I try to put my notes down because I try to write it down in a way I can make it very easy for you. Solar insolation basically is the amount of electromagnetic energy that hits the Earth. Africa is one of the most heated places on the Earth. It gets the most sun. It also makes sense because Africa is in multiple hemispheres. So Africa has different topology, the way that it works. But one of the reasons why we know that historically that people migrated out of Africa, even after the flood, right, is that because of these hot areas, they moved along coastal lines. They moved along the Red Sea. They moved along what you see as the Western Atlantic. They moved over along the Mediterranean. It'll come. You get it. But
Mediterranean.
But I could not get Mediterranean out. But the point is that we know solar insolation happened. And we know that when it happened, it caused people to go to where there was water and where there was ability to grow and live and sustain life. So because of that, we know that people went to the Levant, which is what you see now as the Middle East, what you see with Iran, Iraq, and all this, what we call the Persian Gulf and all these other places. We know that people went to the Iberian, where they went to what is now Italy and areas of that, Morocco and around those areas. We know that people migrated there. And so when people say that, because this is the lie, that the people in the Levant came from Europe, or that they some kind of spindly way around in the migratory path, that they didn't come directly out of Africa, they came out of Africa. They came out of Africa because of the solar, one of the theories is the solar insolation, and it's one of the things that I wrote in that thing on Facebook. But it is the primary reason. It's also the reason why they spent so much time. If you look at these migratory paths, you see how people followed the stars. They followed, we base our stuff on solar time, right? That's time, that's what we call it. It's solar time. But they base things off of the stars and other things else. We know that from the Egyptians, we know that from the Mesopotamians, we know that from all of these different cultures. We look at it differently. And they did that because they were affected by what was going on celestially. When the moon and the things move, and all of a sudden now my crops are dead and my family has to move, you are affected by these environments. So when we look at the Mesopotamians, we look at the Carthaginians, we look at all of these cultures, Phoenicians, the reason why they travel, and we know that they traveled, is because they travel for those purposes. So that's what this map shows you. It shows you that hotness, when it's too hot, we leave, right? People leave. And so you see that in that slide. You can go to that next slide where it kind of shows you also. So a lot of times people lie about our migrations, right? And so when you see the migrations, you will always notice that folks do this thing where they never quite pointedly point at Africa. They do this on purpose, right? They don't ever want it to show migratory paths directly, so the paths seem like they go both ways. Nothing that ever comes directly out of Africa, you will start to see that the arrows point going towards Africa. But the point of it is that life came out of it. It didn't come around in some weird, fanciful way, and they went this way and that way. And it's important for us to know that. So when we say that Nimrod was in Mesopotamia, and he created all of these kingdoms, and he was this mighty warrior before God, this mighty man before God, you understand that he comes from the lineage of Ham, right? And so before as we get into that, so we know that this is where he comes from, and from Cush, right? And that they traveled out and that they populated, which is what the children of Noah were supposed to do, and they went out and that's what they did. And so these cultures are built off of this. And so when everybody says migration, well, there's been multiple migrations, but the migration that we're talking about right now is important because it established what we see as culturally significant, because it created language and intelligence and commerce and the ability for the world to be able to grow in other communities. So that's the important thing of that.
Okay, and you said they. I'm going to go here, and then we're going to come back to this.
Go ahead.
As I told you, I lifted these pages out of my course that I'm going to start teaching as part of our biblical black studies, black biblical studies, right? And I've already read this, but watch this. I want y'all to get this. Now, the whole world was one language and one speech, and I'll come back to that. I'll come back. I said, we use Nimrod because he is a central figure in the Bible and in humanity in general. History is aligned with Scripture by understanding what the Bible clearly tells us about humanity. And I don't want to go there yet, the truth about it now. But at this point, I will briefly mention two prevailing school of thoughts for the land of Shinar. Shinar is in the South Mesopotamia, and let me go show you in the map. There in the map, I have two predominant areas where people say that the land of Shinar was, right? Shinar, and one of them is here in the upper right, southern Mesopotamia. The other area they say is in Africa, northeast Africa. But now watch this. Dr. Eddie talked about how they try to minimize Africa, and let me show you what the King James translators did. And I know Timden said don't go getting on King James, but let's see what the King James translators did. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. And they dwelt there. Now, there's no doubt that Shinar was in the southern Mesopotamia, right? It was in the southern Mesopotamia. But if I look at what the King James translators say, it said they journeyed from the east. So if they came from the east to Shinar, according to King James, they would have come from Asia or Europe or somewhere in there, instead of coming from Africa. Right? Now, let me show you where the King James translators made an error. And the error is so, how would I say, so obvious that I'm wondering whether it was an innocent mistake. No, it couldn't have been an innocent mistake. You're going to see. And I say this by saying that the Bible is infallible. It's infallible in its native languages, in the Arabic, in the Hebrew, and in the Greek. The translators, even the King James translators, inputted their biases. And this one really stood out to me, and it slapped me because of the fact, because this is used to minimize, this scripture here is used as the basis to minimize the people in Africa, the son of Ham. It's used to say that Nimrod was evil. You can go with that. It's used to say that Ham was black because he was cursed and all that stuff. And I'm going to show you where they misled us on this. And I'm talking to King James Translators, misled us. The Bible is infallible in its native language. They were translating it from the native language, and I had to then understand that at the time that they were translating, I think it was like 1611.
1611, yeah.
The countries that they were from were bringing people from Africa as slaves. Right? So it didn't benefit them to show African people in a good light. But I'm going to show you here. So King James said to translate. Now look this. Every other translation, most recent translations say, as the people migrated to the east, as the people moved eastwards, as they came about, they journeyed east. Now look, all these translations say that the people translated east into the Mesopotamia. They journeyed east. Mm-hmm. So if they journeyed east, what's west of the Mesopotamia? Africa. Africa is west of the Mesopotamia. So but that's not bad enough that all these others. Look at this. So I went and looked at it. Traveling eastward from northern Africa would put us in Shinar, the lower Mesopotamia, right? Here is the Hebrew text, okay? And y'all know look, all y'all King James, and I grew up on King James and I love King James, but I'm gonna tell you right now that it is a translation of the original, and they did their thing too. Here's the Hebrew text for Genesis 11:2, right there. And right around there, I put a red box around the phrase that deals with direction. And there are 4 symbols there, Hebrew symbols, and I don't speak Hebrew, and I'm not going to attempt to speak Hebrew. But there are 4 Hebrew symbols there that deals with direction, and the boxes kind of hit the line on one of them on the left, but you see it. Mm-hmm. It was translated by King James Version, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and dwelt there. And right there in the red is what King James Version and King James Translators at Genesis 11:2 said means from the east. But more specifically, I read in Genesis 1 and 2, the Hebrew phrase, it say, has been translated from the east. But what? When it did not matter for the African people, in Genesis 13:11, the exact same Hebrew phrase is used, and there they translated it right. They journeyed east, not from the east, but east. So when they did not want to appear that the original people came out of Africa, they translated it as from the east. But then when they went back to translating, they translated it correctly in the two chapters over. It say, then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. They didn't say he journeyed from the east. Now, here's the same Hebrew. So what we have? So the King James Translators translated the exact same Hebrew phrase as from the east, to prevent from saying that they came out of Africa, and then said going to the east.
It's contrived.
Now, when you look at this, and you look at this map, when we read the Bible, and I try not to give all of this, my class, all of this, just when God kicked man out of the garden, the Bible says he put an angel at the gateway on the east side, which means that if they came out the east side, the entrance into that, they would have continued on going east.
Going east.
That's not from the east. So by King James saying in 11:2 from the east, he's making the original people from somewhere in Asia or the Mesopotamia. But in order to do that, They had to mistranslate.
On purpose. Yeah.
Well, I ain't gonna say on purpose. They had to mistranslate it, but then it just so happened in Genesis 13 and 11, they got the translation right. Mm-hmm. Right? They got the translation right. And then when you look at all these the New Living Translation, the New International Version, the North American Standard Version, the Amplified, and they all say the people traveled east. None of them say they came from the east. And when I look at that, I say, is this an innocent mistake by the King James translators, or is this an attempt to minimize and diminish the African importance in humanity? And I'm going to tell y'all how I got to this. I was putting this class together after talking to a bunch of people out east. I was putting this course together, and I ran into a wall, and I just couldn't get it. And I couldn't get it, and I started praying and seeking God on it. And one morning I woke up, and all I could just hear ringing in my spirit, I could hear the Sumerians. The Sumerians. And I didn't know who the Sumerians were, really. The Sumerians. The Sumerians. Then I went, Dr. Eddie, I got 3 books from people on the Sumerians. Start look. What I found out, that the Sumerian people were the people that journeyed east from Africa to the lower Mesopotamia. Yep. Now, all of those historians say, well, the Sumerians showed up at this time. We really don't know where they came from, but at this time they were entrenched,
they just showed up.
But it just so happened in my courses that I was building the Bible timeline, that at the time that the Bible said they journeyed east is the time that these historians are saying they showed up in the southern Mesopotamia.
That's the historic lie. That's the historic lie, fallacy, right? Anytime, me and my son laugh at this quite often, anytime they can't explain something, they say either the civilization vanished, it just showed up. It's never to give credit. Or my third favorite is, or it's aliens. But those are always thrown in there. And they come up with excuses. So the Sumerians are important because even though they journeyed out of Africa, they created language. But even when you look at the whole story in the Bible of the Tower of Babel, it is important that we understand that the Sumerians had what is called a logo symbolic language. So it was for years, people were studying the Akkadians and everything else. Then they realized, wait a minute. There was a culture that was here that had a language, because now we can go and we can look at archaic Sumerian, we can look at classical Sumerian, we can look at new Sumerian, post-Sumerian. These are the scripts that they use, the pictures that they use that help to create what, even with our language, right? And so it goes along with the Bible when you look at the fact of people having a change in language, right? Different things changed in the language, and they went into different ways. However, there is still some connection there, right? Even though the historians went in and they looked at it and they broke it down and they came up with all these different ways. But cuneiform language, the language that is written in stone, right? We have that language. We have found those things. When they look at the languages of the Mesopotamian people, the Sumerian people, when they look at Babylon and they say, oh man, look at all of this things that they wrote down. What I have always found interesting too with that is that they state that a lot of the things that were written in the stones corresponded with the things that were in the Bible.
Well, and see, this is what's going to be with my course. When I start building the Bible timeline, I've gotten it down to about the point that I can see that Abraham's grandfather or great-grandfather, one of those two, at that level, traveled east into Mesopotamia. And then his father went to Haran, and then Abraham went down from Haran to Canaan. And I built the Bible timeline. You see how the Sumerians was simply the people that journeyed east and settled in Shinar, which is in Samar, right?
Yep.
Which is in Samar. You see that these are the people that journeyed there. And I see now it becomes understandable why they don't want to attribute this to the descendants of Ham, because they invented. They created schools. They created libraries. They did the first time clock. They were engineering. They were tremendously gifted in engineering. How do you think Nimrod could build the tower and it continued to go on?
Yes.
They were during this time frame, right? And so there's a concentrated and a concerted and a comprehensive effort to say those are not the black people. They came from the east. The people that was in that area came from the east.
Yeah.
Even though we have to mistranslate this verse to show it, that's what we're going to show you.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been running with.
That's exactly what we've been running with. But you know, I was saying a couple of weeks ago when my son did his school assignment. See, even in the midst of the hidden and the things that they don't teach, there's still facts and truth that God allows out, because God will not be mocked. There is, if you look at the Egyptians, if you look at the people of Mesopotamia, if you look at the Indus people, if you look at the Asian people, and you start to see that as man migrated out of Africa, and he went, because I always tell people, he goes to areas where he can live and sustain life, rather that be near the ocean or there that be rivers. Mesopotamia means land between rivers. That's what it means. And so the idea is that these river valley people, as that's what the historians call them, the river valley people, right? They learn how to live like this from coming out of Africa. That's when we talk about how that thing I just told you all earlier about being hot, where it made sense. When it got hot, the people went to the Nile. They went to the Wadi Kubanayas. When it got hot, they went to the Levant. They went to the areas where they could be by rivers. And they kept journeying. They kept journeying. Some people just don't stop journeying. And we see that migration pattern. But because of lies and things that have been put out through history, because people are contrived in what they think. If you look at the Red Sea and you look at Port Sudan and you look at Jeddah, those are two of the oldest ports in the world. They have been used for thousands of years. We know it because of the ruins and the boats and the artifacts that have been pulled up out of the Red Sea. So the lies that are told, we know it from the Crusades, because they would come down through the Crusades, and that's how they would get there, right? We're going to go through Jeddah. We know that this is what has been done, but we also have to look at it through like you said, through the Bible, because the Bible allows us to see, to tell that history. If we choose to analyze and look at it, and there ain't nothing wrong with analyzing and looking at it and aligning it, because God did not leave us this information for no reason.
For no reason. So, and that's why I took it took me months and months to build a timeline from when Adam was born, when Adam was created, and then he was put out on the east side of the garden, and the people just continued east.
They just continued.
So how King James came up with they came from the east, I don't know whether that was. It's hard for me to think that was an innocent mistake, because they translated it correctly 2 chapters over.
Yep.
And in the same content, Lot journeyed east. They didn't say Lot journeyed from the east. They said he journeyed east. Well, at that time, Lot would have been coming from a position that would have. They said east. He journeyed east, so he basically went that direction. But why they didn't say that the original people journeyed east, when the Hebrews says the exact same thing about the original people as it does about Lot. But if you journeyed east to the Mesopotamia, what's west of the Mesopotamia? Southern Mesopotamia, Africa.
And they know it, but that desire to hide Africa, that desire, when you look at those migration maps and you see how they really go out of their way with those migration maps. I don't care what migration map you pull up. It always blows my mind. There's somebody in there who, it's like they go out of their way to point the arrows every which way they can but Africa.
But Africa.
Right? And if they do touch Africa, they make it a two-way arrow. Like, okay,
Yeah.
it went this way and then it went that way. No, which way did it go? Because it's a confusion, right? And they spend so much of their time. You know, when historians started to try to figure out where the Sumerian language came from, they didn't ascribe it initially to Africa. They thought it came from the Iberian. Oh, it must have came from the people who went north and they went into Europe. But they always gave it a European or Indo-European or Asian background because they did not want to ascribe it to think that, okay, like this came from Africa. And we need to understand this is before the time of DNA, archaeological research. A lot of this was they just didn't want it to. They wanted to say, "Hey, it came from here. We got this knowledge, and these people down here are lower than us." And so that has always been the push. That's why I say, yeah, it was contrived and it was on purpose with some, not all. Some, people are historians and they want to be truthful, but there's always those pseudo historians that don't want that.
There's one guy, Doctor, I think it's James, but his last name was Leskin.
Yeah.
And so I had to get his book. But what he said was the Sumerian problem, the problem with the Sumerian is deciphering the language.
There you go.
But to me, because what did God do? He confused the language. He said if we could decipher the language, we could actually figure out a lot, but that is the Sumerian problem, right? Is deciphering the language. Well, God confused the language. I mean, this aligns so closely to the Bible. Once you correct the translation error that King James has in 11:2. Yeah. And you don't have to correct it. All you got to do is read to 13:11, and King James Translators themselves.
And they break it down.
They break it down. They translated the same phrase as opposite directions as the exact same phrase. That's just like me saying that shirt you got on is black, but because I don't want to give black people credit, I don't want to lift them up or get them in. So he had a shirt that was not black.
That was not black.
And that's what they did. That's what the translators did. And when I try to find out reasons, the only thing that the experts or the scholars, I'm stop calling them scholars, would say was that they must have did this based upon they assuming that the Garden of Eden and shit was in Mesopotamia, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's not what the Bible said. And see, this is what happens. We keep regurgitating these errors in our churches.
Yes.
And so we basically become complicit in keeping our people in a mindset that we were less than them because of that.
Yep.
Right? That was a recent Sunday school lesson on that. And when I saw that, I started calling our Sunday school teacher saying, wait a minute, no, wait, are we not teaching that book? No. And Dr. Lyon said, no, we don't use that book. I'm like, good, because we're not teaching that mess here. We got it. We have to get it right. And I think if we had gotten it right, the black people as a whole would feel a lot better.
I agree.
About themselves.
I agree.
We know more about the Jewish relationship with God than we know about our own people relationship with God. I went at it with a person recently who talked about voodoo, and they were worshiping, they was on voodoo. You know why they associate voodoo. Black people associate voodoo with Africa so much is because the white people said that it was demon worship, and it was satanic worship, and I got that when I was studying on making the Negro Christian and some of the other places. Well, when the black Africans were worshiping the supreme being with emotion.
Yeah.
And with singing. See, they didn't do that in the white churches. They would just come in and sit down, and people would teach them. But when they worship with emotion, with singing, and they talk about having vision, and then sometimes they said, I don't know whether you're old enough to remember, they said they went into a trance. You know, when I was growing up in the South, they went into a trance. They said, oh, that's voodoo. That wasn't voodoo. That's not voodoo. Right? But we know more about the Jewish relationship with God than our own relationship with God. And let me tell you this here. The Lord said, other sheep I have which are not of this fold. He told the Jews that. He said, I got some other people that are not Jews.
Yeah.
And then he said, but I am come only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So what he's saying, I got some other people that aren't Jews, but I came to the Jews because they lost.
Because you lost. I want to bring you back. Yeah.
I want to bring you lost.
And you know, when you look at how biblically, right? We talked about this before, how the African always was there to protect, to support, to help. You can look at all of the Israelites who married African women, right? Cushite women. And so you start to understand that, wait a minute, if we were so bad, right? Then why you marrying our women like that? Why do you want our women? But our women, and it just goes to show you how important the African culture, the African experience in this world is. But and going back to what you said about even with the voodoo and with the slave, you know, I told someone a couple of years ago, I said, you know, when you look at people like Frederick Douglass and different folks, and they wrote about it in their biographies, and they talked about how black people could get an emotion, and they could get something from God that the whites could not, and it scared them. It made them, when they wanted the Africans to sing in the field, because when they didn't hear them singing, they felt like something was wrong. They felt that the crop would be bountiful because they knew that God heard these people. It's a lot of the reason why some of the nice Christians, the ones who were slave owners, but they was the nice Christian, right? They were like, well, we got to teach them. We got to teach them. We got to do this. We got to do that. But the truth of the matter is, it's because they knew. It's why some of them, they went to some of the African women and some of the black women, and they asked for, hey, could you make this antidote? Could you do this? Y'all know how to do things we don't know how to do. We don't know how you know how to do it, right? But that was given by God. So it is, I love the fact of this, because we need to uncover this. We need to go into this, and we need to show the prejudice and the bias and the concerted efforts that have been used, because it is deep.
It is deep.
To stop us from knowing who we are and knowing where we come from. You know, when people tell me, I had a guy tell me a couple of years ago, I was talking about the African Phoenicians, and he told me, he said, well, you know, the historians say they come from the Levant. They come from they're Arab. I said, who told you that? I said, man, here's the thing. When you only read those who are biased and then doing pseudo history, and you don't open your mind to everybody, because see, you know, here's the thing: the ancient historians, and that's why I tell people, go back. In those early times, they had no reason to lie to you. They told you what it was. They said, hey, look, this was an African, this was an Ethiopian, these were people, this is what they did. We only in the last, I'd say within over 1,000 years, that we've gotten into this idea of let's reduce black people. Let's not let them establish. And there are reasons, there are biblical reasons behind that, but they're and historical reasons. But this is where we are and why we have to uncover all of these things.
Okay. Now I'm gonna go back to your next map, because I found this. I'm glad. I was gonna teach my course to my church earlier, but I was really looking for these migratory paths, and then you posted one. I'm like, Ed, you remember I got to say, I need that. I need that, because this sits right in the center of this course that I'm creating. Because here's my position. We can go to these same theological seminaries and get this same. It's not Kenism. It's more identity Christianity. Yeah. Which a Christian identity or identity Christianity is a Christianity that's based on a Eurocentric perspective, and it has a European Jesus, and this came about in the early 19th century.
Yeah.
You know, and that's pretty much what that's what they taught us or allowed us to learn. That's what we've been propagating and propagating and propagating. So you can continue to go to those seminaries and get that. Right, but I'm the type of person that said no. When we know the truth, we're not. So we've created our own curriculum, and we are applying for accreditation, so that we can actually confer the credentials on people that go through our curriculum. Right? There's no need to continue learning this stuff that's identity Christianity based.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
It just doesn't make sense.
I agree.
It just doesn't make sense for us to continue to learn this stuff that's identity Christianity based or kinism based. Now, what we're gonna find as I was putting some of these things together, 70 or 80% of stuff matches, but it's these things like the misrepresentation of a direction in Genesis 11:2 that minimize Africa. Well, if we put all that together, then the rest of the Bible falls into place.
Right into
and
place.
it basically says you wouldn't have people saying the Bible contradicts itself if you did not have the translators trying to minimize Africa in certain places.
That's true.
And I say this, we know that the Word of God is infallible, but that the Old Testament was written in Arabic and Hebrew. It's infallible. The New Testament written in Greek. It's infallible. It's the knucklehead translators that you have to really be on, right? You really have to be on those knucklehead translators, right? And so we created our own. If you go to fpbi.net and look at our matriculation calculation, I didn't know why. As the Lord had us developing these courses, and one of them we started. You got a certificate for participation if you just took the course. But if you took the course and took the quizzes and passed the quizzes, you got a certificate of completion. And I didn't know the Lord had sent me through all this schooling and training, how to develop curriculum, how to be instructor, how to do all this stuff. And so now we're applying for accreditation.
Yeah.
And we've listed our curriculum at fpbi.net, and we're gonna look. There's an old saying: if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. We can keep going to these seminaries and keep getting this Christian identity or identity Christian-based theology, or in some instances, it's outright kinism-based theology. We can teach our people truth ourselves. It's a lot of work because you have to do it, but it's what God has put us there. And like I said, there was no reason why God had in this scripture, and this one begot this one and live X amount of years. This we got this one, live X. That's how I put a timeline that got me from Adam to the land of Shinar in the Mesopotamia. And then when I look at Dr. Kramer and Dr. Kaysen, they said, well, the Sumerians, nobody knows where they come from, but by 29 or 28 BC, they were firmly entrenched into the. Well, it just so happened that you're saying that they were firmly entrenched at the same time that the Bible said people in northern Africa traveled east.
But the thing is, even though the languages are confused. Again, that comes down to the idea of God is not mocked, because even within the language, even God also leaves you trace, right? Even within the language, you start to see. I pulled a chart the other day where it broke down all of it. It broke down the Western Semitic, the East Semitic. It broke down the Ethiopic language, and how the Central Semitic, and how all of those languages fit from each other, all the way to our language, right? And so. It's something that is there, but again, if it doesn't fit the consensus, and let's understand, some people, I used to tell people it's about writers. A lot of times, it's not that people are necessarily racist or biased. I say this about black screenwriters. It's that you write what you study, and what you learned, and now you are working in a cyclical kind of mentality where you don't deviate outside of that circle because this was said, and I'm just going to follow this. And so people are quick. My wife and me always say they're quick to regurgitate or to say the same thing. sometimes you got to think outside and say, wait a minute, that don't sound right.
Exactly.
Right? So, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put up some more of these, the second one, and you can talk us through that. These migratory paths. I'm telling you, my heart's full now. I'm sitting next to the historian himself, and this is awesome.
When you start to, so things to understand with these migratory maps, a lot of times what has always angered me with these is that you will notice when you look at them, here's another game that they play. And I say this because it's a historical game. You will start to see, and if you watch me at any point in time, you know I got an issue with it. We talk about the Neanderthals, we talk about the Cro-Magnon, we talk about, there's a reason why we dump these creatures and these evolutionary creatures out on the map. And the reason why scientists have said, and they align them with man. However, I will tell you that there are archaeologists and people, as we look through DNA and things right now, to say, wait a minute, those things may not be related, right? But it's a way to dissuade you away from the actual migration of a people. As Pastor Razor just said with the Bible pretty much tells you how man migrated. Mm-hmm. It did not mean, right, as you look at like this map right here, it didn't mean that other creatures and things and the way the world was initially made, that they're not on this planet or on this map and not buried in the ground. But understand that the archaeologists, historians, and the people, they are telling you this. They tell you this for a reason, because it creates a disruption in your thought process. If I just say, well, the reason why there are men in the Levant is because as you look through this one thing, it says they had the descendant of the Neanderthal, right? Mm-hmm. So they give you the Neanderthal man as the reason why life is here. So if I can say that, then I ain't got to justify you that Africans were here. I just say that man must have developed in this area based on these Cro-Magnon men and men that we created. That is, when you heard me say earlier, there are many migration paths that they try to throw at you. I will always tell you, follow the history. If the history tells you, and they're finding the history, that's why man goes and digs up in the desert. That's why they're digging up in Egypt right now. That's why they dig in South America. Man is always digging these things up because he knows that some of this stuff ain't right, right? And we've known this. So we know that men left out of Africa, and they went into Mesopotamia, and they went into, and they did, some went north, some went other places. We know that because we found actual remnants of men who are actual men, not creatures, right? And I say that because this is a big issue going on right now with historians and archaeologists. We're starting to find that the Australopithecus and all the stuff that they told us, y'all know, because y'all was told in the school too, the whole Darwinism and all of this stuff that they told us, we're starting to get cracks in that. Because, because there are things that Darwin didn't know, right? There are things that we're starting to find out through genetics, through study, that tells us, wait a minute, that don't make any sense. I had a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of months ago on Erudition. And I was telling him about the migratory paths that went up into the Iberian. That would be where you see Italy. And I said, you know, they did a DNA study. And I put it, it's actually on Erudition's group. And I said, if you go look at that study, they told you that white people, whites as we know them, you've only really been around about maybe 100,000, 50,000 years. He said, oh, no. Mm-hmm. We've been here longer than that. It was long. I said, no. You have not been. The reason why, and we look at the DNA and we can tell the reasons why you migrated out of those areas. I told you guys solar interpolation earlier, but the other issue is because they couldn't handle the sun, but they also couldn't handle the animals, the milks and different things that were being done in Africa. Take whatever reasons why, but those people who were lighter skinned, they left and they went north or they went away. That's why we have cheddar man, people with blue eyes, lighter skin, as they made their way up to Europe. But they all come from Africa. If you look at this migratory path that makes its way through Asia, the blue ones and the red ones here, you start to see, again, and even going down toward Australia, you have historians now that are finding that when there's a thing down there that says Mount Toba eruption, that whole Mount Toba eruption thing is a huge issue with a lot of people because they don't want to face the fact that when Toba erupted, it caused devastating effects on that area of the planet. So that's why you see Australian people look the way they do. That's the reason why you see Asians look the way they do. They were separate and cut off from who? Those people that you see in the Levant. When those people went up into the Middle East, they kept going. If you look, they got further out into what you see Asia as man migrated. As that migration happened and as different catastrophes happened, a lot of them were cut off. We know that. And when God has made us to be adaptable creatures, psychologists, doctors, people will tell you that. We are adaptable creatures. And so they adapted to those different areas. That's why you don't see the Australian, the people down there, they don't look the same. That's why you don't see the Asians look the same. But if you were to test the DNA and the historical markers of the Asians and the people in Central Africa, they share the same DNA types. And people argue and say, whoa, wait a minute, how is that? Because, again, we're tracing history. We're looking through these things. We're trying to break these things down. And I appreciate you, Pastor Reyes, for doing it on the biblical side, because it does show you that that's where we went, right? They didn't go to the top, flip back around. They went, right, east. And those folks in the Levant, those folks that journeyed, those Phoenicians, even those Carthaginians, all of these people who we constantly bring up, there's a reason why we bring them up. If you look at the Phoenicians who sailed around, right, they sailed around Africa and they went around. That's not noted on here. That's not noted on a lot of those, on a lot of the migration maps. But people went over the waters. They knew how to use boats. How do we know this? Because we have the archaeological finds, we have the boats, the things that we found that are sitting in museums around the world. But we have to piece those things together, and that's what you're doing.
And I did that, the DNA in my book, Biblically Black and Blessed. I talk about Rebecca Cann, geneticist, who did exactly that. She took DNA from, I think, 230 plus women from every place in the world, all over the world. And she said when she extrapolated that DNA, that every female had DNA, regardless of where they were in the world, that traced them back to a beginning.
That mitochondrial Eve.
In sub-Saharan Africa.
There you go.
And as we know, sub-Saharan Africa, that entire area was known as Ethiopia.
Yes.
So when we talk Jews and Gentiles, we're not talking complete. You should be talking Jews who came from Shem, Gentiles who came from Japheth, and you should be talking Ethiopians who were the original people, right? That God, when I say Ethiopia, don't think of just the country of Ethiopia today. Think of all sub-Saharan Africa.
That's what they were, yes.
Right? And so she did that. And she did, and then I also quote Nina Jablonski, who is an anthropologist, who also talks about what you just said, how as they moved from Africa to these cultures, they were adapted. Their skin color changed. Yes. They became hairier, less hairier as they went to colder climates north, less hairier and darker as they came because they adapted. So great. Let's go to your next one here.
Okay, so again, this is the out of Africa route. Again, when we look at these migratory patterns, so this one, again, you're looking at folks who are coming out of Africa. This map here is important because what it's showing you, again, I like this one because it didn't do the two-way, right? It kind of shows you that from Central Africa, how people, right, went up and started peopling Eurasia, India, these river valley places that the historians spend so much talking about, but also the Iranian areas, the Kuwaitis, all of these different areas. We really need to understand that the African, and I can't state it enough, is where all these populous people came from. They came from here.
There you have it.
They came from here. And this is the studies, these are scientists. We have looked at it. They're looking at the recombinational patterns. They're looking at the analysis. They're looking at the DNA. We're looking at these things because for the better part of 1,000 years, yes, 1,000 years, people have lied to us. They have hidden this from us. Matter of fact, The Catholic Church used to say they would remove people because you would state these things and say, well, that's not the way we see it, right? So these things were used to be taboo. You couldn't talk about them. So yeah, this is another map that basically shows you how we transferred out. It doesn't give you the years, but it gives you the areas, and it tells you what the present day populations and names are, so that you can see how everything populated itself. You can see how people came up, how the Indian is related to the Asian, how the Asian is related, and the Indian is related to the African, how the African is related to the Greek, how the Greek and all of these people are related to the European. So a lot of people know this. I always tell people about the Renaissance. Renaissance was basically meant to revisit, right? When they went through the Renaissance, they went and started pulling a bunch of Roman things. But the Romans, that stuff that they were pulling were things that the Romans had taken out of Africa, had taken out of the Middle East. So all of that knowledge that they were taking, it again removed, because we weren't told that. We weren't told that Greek myths had stuff to do with Africans. We weren't told that the Greek myths and things and the Roman myths that we had to deal with African people. All these things with Theseus and all these folks, all these stories that these people were telling, they were basing it on the lands and the beauty and the wealth of Africa. And so we need to teach those things.
And I look at this map, and I'm glad you didn't put the other one up there, because I got that in my course.
Yeah.
It has numbers on it, dates.
Yeah.
In other words, you can see out of Africa, which was the first civilizations, and then how the times they went. And you can see that, as you said earlier, the Europeans, they were some of the last people to develop.
Yeah. One, it's cold. Ain't nobody all right. The other areas, you could be populous and you could grow. In a lot of these areas too, you look around the Black Sea and in Russia, and you look in the areas, you could, in the Caspian, you could actually live there and sustain life. There's a reason why Stalin and all of them said, hey man, we're going to send you north when in Russia people would die. It's cold. Yeah.
And so, so the one that I use in my course that I'm going to be teaching in January to the church, the one that I use, it actually routes, but it tells you, I give you time frame, so you can see which civilizations or which areas developed the first, second, as they go. And then there's one I know we're getting ready to go. I'm not going to go back to the rest of my slides, because I had some of that. I was going to produce some more of the slides, but I think you get the point when I showed you that the King James Translators translated the same Hebrew phrase as two directions based upon whether or not we wanted to make Africa important. Okay, here was your last
Again,
map.
When I posted this, I wanted everybody to see how the trickery goes, right? Again, the way to
this has numbers on it too.
To dismiss us a lot of times is they add things in there that they call science, but they haven't really proven it. And so it took me a long time to get my mind around this. For years, I was like, okay, this don't make no sense. So, but all this comes from here, but now you telling me these people were already here. And it took a long time for me to understand that they were adding things in. One of the courses that I'm trying to build right now, they were adding things in for evolution that didn't make sense. And then there's a whole thing that these people didn't understand. I think I told you, we were talking Sunday, and I was telling you that, when you look at history and you look at Darwinism, we all get told Darwinism and evolution. And I'm not telling you evolution is not something it can happen. What I'm telling you is that there were things that Darwin didn't understand. And that Darwin, even though Darwin may not have been racist, Darwin's circle was racist. And so if your inspiration is racist, then the ideas that you have could generate racial themes. And Darwinism showed us, because you went into eugenics and all this other stuff, what we're looking at right now is just how much of this stuff that they align together. And I spent a lot of time talking about this on their edition, but that we've aligned things together that don't really make sense to who human beings are and how we migrated and how we came. And a lot of it is used to denounce the fact of what came out of Africa. That's
okay. I think that's it. I'm not going to go through the rest of this. But my point was this: how the translators translated this person, and how they translated this Hebrew phrase as from the east in 11 and 2 when they talk about the original people. But then when we get to 13 and 11, they said they translated that phrase as a journeyed toward the east or journeyed east, right? And my question was always why?
Why?
Why would the King James Translators
It's just funny.
translate the same phrase
It's
as
so
from the east to make sure that they were not coming out of Africa, but then say they would. And here's the thing. It's the exact. If you go, anybody can go and pull up the Greek for those two verses,
translate.
and you'll see that they translated them totally opposites.
It's one of the reasons why I think I did a lesson maybe a year ago on cuneiform language, and I was talking about how when you look at Babylon, you look at even with the Romans, you look at Egypt, and you look at how, especially between Mesopotamia and Egypt, how they would trade sandstone writing between each other, right? And so when people say that, oh, well, we don't know where they came from, they're very clear. Matter of fact, there were kings, you can go look this up, there were kings in Mesopotamia who credited themselves with being experts in the understanding of Sumerian language. This is one of the reasons why they were able to understand that there were different eras of Sumerian language. But when you look at that and how they would write in these stones, these pictograms, and they would translate and send things to Egypt, it's the reason why all of this knowledge was being shared. Egypt would take things from Africa, from Nubia, and they would send it all out. We have these stones in libraries around and museums around the world that still have the actual written languages because they learned how to heat those stones up, right? They would do it in clay and then heat them up, and they would keep them. And they started to build them up. They found that the Asians, they would write language on bones. For a very long time, Asians, the Asian culture, we didn't know who they were and what they were because they would write the stuff on bones and then they would burn or destroy the bones. And so they found that they were destroying their own history. We know that the areas of Africa, Levant, and going into the Indus, that they are connected because the Indus people, again, the culture who they said vanished, they look at the remnants of cities that they built that look like African cities, that look like cities in the Levant. This is shared information that has been shared as people travel and go do different things. They didn't just forget how to build those towers. They didn't just forget how to build those civilizations. They transferred those things as they went further.
Okay, Sister Callahan throwing a punch at you. She said, how many books have you written to put this information out there? So she's siding with your brother-in-law, Tim.
Yeah, I know. Look, my wife is probably you all's biggest advocate to tell me all the time, Eddie, write a book, write a book, write a book, write a book. And I have gone with it as God is gonna lead me because it's a lot to do, but I do believe we're in that time where we have to do it. The reason why I put it off is because I was doing a course. I'm trying to create these courses just like you are because I believe that we're in a time right now where people need a course. They need some things where they can have it to look at and study and grow themselves. I am all for a book, and I do believe that we should write some, but that's been my focus. My other focus has been erudition, trying to get it ramped up and try to get people to watch it and get folks backing us and seeing what we're trying to do. And I appreciate the circle that we have. I would not spend any time wasting my time, but I know what Pastor Razor is about. I told my wife, I said, as a matter of fact, when we had some things going on, my wife said, we got to make sure we spend some time, and I get you over there so you can spend some time with Pastor Razor. That is a priority for you and coming to Chicago because that stuff needs to be out there. You all are trying to do a work, and it's a hard work. It's a hard work because, like Pastor Razor said, you brush up against people. People get their feelings hurt. They say, well, that's not the way I was taught. But that's the point. You weren't taught that way on purpose. And so we're trying to get you to understand, hey, dig a little deeper, go a little further, read this. I tell you, I ain't gonna do it tonight, but I got about 6 books I can tell you to read. But the reality of it is there are books and things out here to study to validate everything that we're saying to you. Like Pastor Razor said, you can go pull that translation up yourself and say, oh man, this is what they do.
Dr. Joe said both statements are relative. From the east makes sense because Africa is the origin, but if they was traveling from the east, they wouldn't have been traveling from Africa in that statement, right? If they were traveling from the east, they, as the original people at 11 and 2, they wouldn't have been traveling from Africa because that would have been, if they was traveling from Africa, they would have been going east. So, right. But he said in the translator is west of Africa. Israel is not the origin. Well, the translator was King James. And so King James, he was the translator.
Yeah, I don't know about that relative.
Yeah, and either way you put it, though, he took the same statement and translated it as opposite directions.
There you go.
And so there's something conniving about that, right?
It is.
There's something conniving about that. But yeah, I got you. I looked at when I saw, I'm like, no, we can't teach that because that doesn't work. That doesn't jive, and it doesn't work with history. It doesn't work with the Bible and other places, and it didn't even work with Genesis in the 13th chapter when they saw that same verse and they said, oh, this phrase means going east, and every other here's the thing that really got it for me is that all these other translations translated it correctly.
Yeah, they did it exactly the way that it's supposed to be.
They were going east.
Joe, I would also tell you, though, I will say this to my cousin, that the other thing is, let us not forget what was going on in Europe at the time. And so when you look at what was going on in those areas, right, you start to understand that there is motivation there. Yeah. There is motivation to not tell the truth. There's motivation. There's so much pressure being put on contributing to a fallacy. I won't say a lie, to a fallacy, right? And so when you look at these ancient kingdoms and these ancient rulers, there were reasons why they did what they did, because it's political.
And if you put it in Africa, and we know that God put man out of Eden on the east side. So then, if they were traveling from the east, as they said there, instead of eastward, then it would appear that they would have been going west in Africa, right? Instead, and then they would have had to go around. God didn't put them out on the west side of Africa so that they could go from the east into that direction.
That's true.
He sent them east. And really, that's the way the verse should have been translated. I'm so glad, though, we can go to other translations like New Living Translation, NIV, and they did it right. So what they did, they didn't look at the King James and translate. They went back to the original. I find it funny
because, they'll tell you all of this, but the reality of it is when they travel, I was telling my son one time, we were studying history, and then we were talking about the Crusades and the Europeans. They were traveling to Israel and everything, and they were doing all the stuff going into the Middle East. And I said, it's so funny that they traveled that long, but what was also amazing is if you look at the writings and the things that came out during the Crusades, how they were amazed at what they were going through, what they were sailing through. They were amazed at the ability of these ancient people, because they're coming from England and Europe and France and all of this, and they think that these people are less than, right? Mm-hmm. And they come down there and they realize, man, they got ports, they got people, they got amazing things, and they wrote about this.
Well, even today we are on course to go back to living the way they live. We get in small houses, trying to do everything organic, trying to be back to nature people with the way they live.
Yeah.
So, okay, Dr. Eddie, it was great having you here tonight. We've already gone over.
I know.
But look at this. Look at the screen there. Erudition Network, ERUDITION. If you are not connected to them, go on Facebook right now, go to their YouTube channel and subscribe. Let me tell you how logarithms work, right? Is that we basically create the voice that we want to propagate through our communities, right? So every time you go on and like and click on and like and share the person that's twerking, you building their network, right? We need to take the Erudition Network, because this young man does some awesome teaching every week, and they've got something for everybody. The children, the teens, he's got his sons, his wife does that for the women, and he's on here, and it's all part of the Erudition Network. You need to like it, share it weekly. You need to go to YouTube. Let's subscribe to it. You know, I basically, I don't subscribe to a lot of people on YouTube because I understand logarithms. I'm building their network. Why would I be building someone's network that doesn't benefit or that's not even propagating the ideals, the thoughts, or the position, or my positions, or the positions of the Lord, right? And so let's go and connect with the Erudition Network. Let's get our people, let's get our friends, our family, let's get them to be a part of the Erudition Network. And let's get, the only way, like I say, we can keep propagating this Christian identity stuff, and I'm just talking about my position as a pastor. This kinism or Christian identity stuff, which basically minimizes the black relationship with God, the importance of black people in the Bible, and where basically we've eliminated the black people in the Bible and say they're just Jews and Gentiles. Right. Or we can learn correctly. And I tell you, I think our people would feel a lot better about themselves if they'd been taught the things that you're teaching on the Erudition Network right now.
I agree.
So do you have any closing remarks before we go?
No, I enjoyed doing this. I was trying to, you know, to figure out how we was gonna do it, but I'm so happy that I was able to get the time to come do this and talk about this, because I do think that it is very important. It won't be the last time, you know, that we get together to do something, because I know we share that idea of teaching and educating and growing, because it is so important. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It was on my to-do list. I told everybody I definitely wanted to try to get this done today and get on here and us to talk about these things. So
well, it definitely won't be the last time, because my wife and I, we're going to fly to Denver and just spend a weekend.
Come on.
And we're going to get a conference room and have you to come down, because before I start teaching this course, I want to go through it with you. I want to go through it because you know, I thought Biblically Black and Blessed 1 and 2 was something until I really started diving into it and the stuff that I needed to do to tie this together. Right? To tie this together. And so I had to actually do this. But when I was explaining, like I said, at first I was intimidated in D.C. because all these people were PhDs, right? They were, who is this? Doctor this. And so they started asking me questions. And I started asking, I got into a routine. I mean, I got into the zone. And then one of them said, man, this should be a class. We'll pay for this.
Yes.
You know, we'll pay for this, right?
It's the God and the intelligence, Pastor Razor. God has to be in your intelligence, you know, and I hear you say it a lot. You got to pray and you got to seek God and you got to ask God, open my understanding to this. In anything and everything that you do, you know, God will meet you, you know, once you reach out to him. And I do believe that, you know. People ask me, Eddie, you read all of these ancient people, and I do. I spend time going through and translating and reading a lot of stuff. I said, but you know, that's because God gave me the desire and the want to do that, and I want to understand what really happened. And so everybody, I don't think everybody would do that, but not without guidance, not without saying, hey, go look at this. So yeah, it's always good. And
we're in a day now. Most people they Google
click,
it, and the first thing that comes up, they take it. Whereas being someone that worked in technology, I used to see it all the time. You can Google something and 50 different people will say 50 different things. That's the weakest research.
Yeah. Oh man.
That you can do. Right?
That research thing. People really knew what research was, ladies and gentlemen. He's telling you that he's going through and he's. Yes, it's work. It is work.
And Kathy Callahan's she's on the soapbox tonight. So you need to teach what you teach instead of they teaching that blacks slavery benefit blacks and the skills that
that's
they
a whole
got. That's a whole nother story, right?
Yeah, we don't get into that. Yeah, we try very hard to teach you before.
Dr. Joe said we have to start putting the truth back in the stone again. That's right. Make sure that it doesn't change. Look, we thank you all for being here tonight, for joining us online. We want to thank Dr. Eddie Phillips for his time and just being here with us. And look, want to say everybody that's on here, look, do this. Everybody that's on here, if you can get 10 people to to join the Erudition Network this week. Let's do it. Can we commit that everybody, 10 people online, 10 of your friends say, hey, Erudition Network, join the Erudition Network, subscribe to the Erudition Network on YouTube. This is how we build a logarithmic network.
Yeah.
And this is how we get the information out. Okay?
Yep.
Okay, so we want to thank you all for joining us, and we're going to call it a night for tonight, and I'm going to go home and go to bed too. I'm tired. I've been at church most of the day today. So we love you. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you all later. Bye-bye.